is hell-bent on turning the whole of Gaza into a graveyard. Will the UK government now urgently impose a full arms embargo on Israel in the hope that it is the only thing that UK can do to try and stop the starvation and the potential genocide of those left in Rafah?
In the early part of his question, he did indeed set out what we are all of us trying to address. When it comes to an arms embargo, he will know that the amount of arms that Britain supplies is negligible, but equally we operate an arms supply regime, an arms sales regime, which is strictly governed by the rules which I've set out to the House before, and we continue to act in respect of the question that he asked me, in respect of the legal advice that we receive, and we will continue to do so.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, of course I'm greatly concerned about the humanitarian situation in Gaza right now, but I'm also greatly concerned that anything happens that gives Hamas an increased foothold in Gaza, which puts them in a position where it can inflict more evil and more misery, like we saw on October 7th. I'm also concerned that some of these ceasefire agreements seem to involve releasing hundreds of terrorists, Hamas terrorists, and don't involve all of the hostages being fully released. Will the Deputy Foreign Secretary give me a commitment that we intensify plans for a Hamas-free Gaza, so that people, innocent people in Gaza, can look forward with hope to a future and peace?
He is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, that Hamas can have no role in Gaza in the future, and much of the work that we are doing in that respect is designed to help build up the Palestinian Authority so that it can be involved in governing both the West Bank and Gaza as soon as the time is right.
George Galloway.
It's precisely the point, Mr. Speaker, that the Deputy Foreign Secretary's answers today are virtually identical to the one he gave, including to me, last Tuesday. The situation has escalated, but the government's response remains the same. There are 600,000 child hostages in Rafah alone. There's no proof of life from them, but millions of our people are watching on their phone today the proof of death and mutilation of many of them. The government say they're doing everything they can, but they are not, because you could now stop sending weapons to the people who are raining down this death and misery. And the Labour Party could actually ask you to, but didn't.
When you say you, it's not me that's responsible. Foreign Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about the fact that the answers I gave to him, indeed, and to others last Tuesday are the same. And they reflect, insofar as the parameters of the situation are the same, the fact that the policies we are pursuing are long-term and they are designed to tackle the evils that have been so clearly set out this afternoon in the House. He also makes a point about the number of children who are denied food and medicine in Rafah, and he will know that Britain has, through medical aid and through the British contribution, not least through a field hospital, been careful to make sure that where we can bring help, medical help, particularly to children, we are doing so.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now 214 days since those 130 plus hostages have been held in barbaric conditions, been subject of rape and torture, and indeed denied medical access from the International Red Cross. The sad reality is that Israel put on the table a deal that could have led to a ceasefire right now, in return for some of those hostages, but not all, and indeed for the recent Palestinian prisoners who've been convicted in courts of law. Secretary Blinken has described this as an extraordinary, generous offer, yet Hamas refused to accept it. Does my right honourable friend take the view that Hamas have it in their power to accept the position of a ceasefire and the violence and war can come to an end naturally as a result.
The point that my honourable friend makes, one that in different ways has been echoed across the House, is that we must ensure we do everything we can to make certain that these negotiations that are taking place at the moment in Cairo make progress and are successful. And that tonight is what everyone should be hoping can be achieved.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to repeat what I think that the Deputy Foreign Secretary has been saying to us today, and that is we have not seen a credible plan for evacuation from Rafah. That is what he has said, and there is currently an incursion into Rafah. Now, if I add those two things up, what he is saying between the lines is that Israel has currently breached the rule that the UK has set. And I don't think he wants to say it here, but that is what I am hearing. So if there is no credible plan to move those people and the attack is ongoing, when can we expect, if not today, an update on the UK's position towards Israel, arms sale and other things that have been mentioned today from this dispatch box?
Well, I have given her the update from the dispatch box insofar as there is an update to give. And she asked me about the words that we are using in respect of Rafah. What I have made clear is that we have not seen a credible plan for military action in Rafah so far, and therefore we are not able to judge whether or not it would be in accordance with international humanitarian law. And that is the point which I have been making to the House.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel is our friend and ally, but that doesn't stop us questioning their actions. My right honourable friend today, the Deputy Foreign Secretary, says he wants to see much more aid getting into Gaza. The actions in Gaza over the weekend have only made those miles-long queues of lorries even greater. Air and sea drops are difficult. Will he today, on behalf of the government, appeal to our allies to allow those mile-long queues in Rafah to rapidly go into Gaza and relieve the suffering of the people there?
Well, we continually appeal, Mr. Speaker, for more aid to get in by road. We have made the arrangements through the maritime form of entry and from the air, but getting aid in through the road system and through the entry points is by miles the best way to achieve that. And I said at the outset of my remarks that we were very concerned indeed that no aid got in through Rafah or Karim Shalom yesterday. We are doing everything we can, as we have been since the start of this crisis, to ensure that more aid is getting in, and we will continue to do so.
Samuel Wilson.
Speaker, the pro-Hamas network of the press, politicians and protesters are becoming increasingly hysterical in their efforts to stop Israel pursuing those who carried out the pogrom of murder, rape, torture and hostage-taking last October. Does the Minister accept that if there is to be long-term peace in the Middle East, we must continue to support Israel in its battle against Hamas, in defending itself and in pursuing those who are cynically hiding behind innocent civilians today and then tomorrow use those deaths, the deaths of those innocent civilians, as a propaganda weapon?
Well, he makes the point, Mr. Speaker, that Israel does have the right of self-defence, but I'm sure he would accept that that must be exercised within international humanitarian law.
Don Butler.
Speaker, Minister, what does finish the job mean? With 40,000 people dead, many of them children, is it when every single man, woman, child, baby is dead in Gaza? Is that what finish the job means? The government said that an invasion of Rafah wouldn't be compliant with international law. The Minister says that we don't supply that much arms to Israel. Well, if we were to stop the supply that we do supply, wouldn't that send a message that our government abides by and thinks it's important that we follow international law?
Well, the Honourable Lady, I hope, will accept that the government, while it doesn't publish the legal advice that it receives, it always acts in accordance with it.
Yes. Liz Savile Roberts.
My constituent, Emily Fairs, has family in Gaza. Here's her message. We heard from our family yesterday. Half of them have now fled Rafah after threatening evacuation orders fell from the sky. When we spoke to them, they didn't know where they were going. They mentioned Al-Mawasi. But there is no building there for them to stay. It's not safe there. There are no food provisions there. There's nowhere to go to the toilet, nowhere to wash. They are now utterly destitute. Forced displacement is a war crime, Mr. Speaker. His government have it in their power to set up a scheme for people desperate to join family in the UK. If not now, when?
Well, the Honourable Lady sets out the reports that she has received, which are heartrending reports, and that is why the government, with as much vigour and cooperation with our allies, is trying to do those things which I have set out.
Lawrence Escher-Lermy.
Mr. Speaker, the initial Israeli offence in Rafah began last night and it's been described as limited. An operation is not limited if it results in the evacuation and forced displacement of around 100,000 people. An operation is not limited if it results in all crossing being closed and humanitarian aid being completely halted. We cannot, as a House, downplay the significance of what is happening. The Minister said that the government is doing everything they can. But will the Minister make clear from that dispatch box that the government does not support this offensive and that there must be consequences under international law if it goes ahead?
Mr. Speaker, the government made it absolutely clear that we have yet to see a plan in respect to any military operations in Rafah, but we have always made it clear that any such plans must abide by international humanitarian law.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For months, the Minister has come here and told us the government's asking the Israeli government to do this, the government's requesting that the Israeli government does that. The harsh truth is that Israel is ignoring the UK government. And the truth is that our government actually now needs to act. Words are not enough. We need action to show that there are consequences for breaching international law. Act now by ending arms sales. Act now by suspending the trade talks, because if the government doesn't do what's necessary and take the action to help prevent the attack on Rafah, then isn't it the case that the Israeli government will see it as our government giving him the green light to commit yet more war crimes?
The honourable gentleman will have seen what the Foreign Secretary has said, what the Prime Minister has said, and he will have seen the way in which we are working with our allies, with countries in the region, to try and improve the situation. And he will know, as the whole House knows, that there is no magic solution to this. We have to continue to persist with the arguments and with the logic that is so clearly set out in United Nations Security Council resolutions 2020 and 2028, and we will continue to do so.
Mr.
Speaker, over the last 7 months, I and many of us across this House have come to the Chamber to gain an understanding of what the red lines are for the UK government, but it feels like there aren't many. It felt like it wasn't a red line when babies in Gaza were removed from the wombs of their dead mothers. It felt like it wasn't a red line when children in Gaza looked up to the sky, not knowing if aid or bombs were going to drop on them. And now in Rafah, displaced refugees once again face the threat of forcible transfer. And again, it doesn't feel like this is a red line. Yet given that there's precedent for halting arms sales to Israel, will the UK government finally halt arms sales? And if not, can the Deputy Foreign Secretary please explain to us what is the cost associated to a Palestinian life, and what are the red lines? What does Benjamin Netanyahu have to do that is too much?
Well, the case that she makes, Mr. Speaker, is one that should encourage everyone, the government, but everyone else as well, to do everything they can to bring an end to this catastrophic conflict, which is causing such pain to so many.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. I will start again, as I always do. I condemn Hamas. I think all the refugees on both sides should be returned. But the attack on Gaza has started. The escalation of humanitarian disaster, catastrophe continues in contradiction to international law. Too much hand-wringing has taken place. Too much making excuses has taken place. We have to call what it is. We stand whilst people are starving, while children are dying of malnutrition, while there is no support for the civilians in that area. As the case has been for hostages to be released, what will happen when that Rafah is bombed? What will happen to the Israeli refugees? This is a policy which is doomed from start. Will he call for a ceasefire now and move forward?
Well, he will know that the government has consistently sought a pause so that the hostages can get out and aid can get in, and has worked tirelessly, I would argue, to try and ensure that aid does get in, including inventing new ways of trying to achieve that. And he started his question by pointing out that an attack had started in Rafah, but he will also know that negotiations are proceeding in Cairo, and we must hope that those negotiations are successful as quickly as possible.
Jessica Morgan.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask again, with nowhere safe for Palestinians to go and overcrowding in places like Al-Mawassa, where exactly does the UK government think Palestinians displaced from eastern Rafah should go next? And if he has no answer, why does the government's response just remain the same?
As I have repeatedly made clear, Mr. Speaker, we think there needs to be a pause in the fighting, which, in the way that I have expressed on numerous occasions in the House, can lead to a sustainable ceasefire.
Kenny McCaskill.
It's not time to recognise that Israel's actions are not a disproportionate response to 7th of October. They are in fact part of a concerted plan to make Gaza unlivable, to extirpate the Palestinian population there, at the same time as they encroach upon Palestinian territories in the occupied West Bank. And as a result of that, is it not time that we ceased arms sales, stopped being complicit in their military actions, reinstated UNRWA raid, and conjoined with other nations in condemning this dreadful genocide?
Yeah.
Well, as I've said to the House before, Mr. Speaker, I do not think it is helpful to use terms like genocide, and I think it's important that the House should recognise that the findings of the court have been misrepresented in that respect. As Joan Dongu, a former president of the ICJ, still serving at the time of the preliminary decision, stated, the ICJ did not decide that the claim of genocide was plausible.
Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talks about a pause. The United Nations voted for a resolution calling for a ceasefire. The Minister is now talking about looking at military plans by the Israelis in relation to Gaza, when thus far the international community has made clear that there shouldn't be an invasion of Gaza. It feels like the minister's going backwards, and his government has still failed to restore UNRWA funding, which is making the matter and the misery worse, and he has failed to take action to make sure his government supports the implementation of the International Court of Justice provisional measures and the ICC investigation to the occupied Palestinian territories. The Minister has got a good track record in the past, but he is failing us by taking us backwards on this very important issue. When is he going to take action on these specific measures?
Can we really speed up questions that some people aren't going to get into?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't recognise the early part of her question, but let me assure her, as I have in the past of the House, that we are doing everything we can to address the dreadful situation which she has so eloquently articulated.
Senator Beckham.
The Minister's reply on the 17th of April to my written question referred to wanting to, and I quote, see Israel take greater care to limit its operations to military targets. Can the Minister confirm that he is finally aware, therefore, that Israel has not limited its onslaught to military targets, and given the government's own licensing criteria refers to risk that items might be used to facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law or serious acts of violence against women or children, how can
How can continue to arm Israel's bombardment of Palestinian civilians possibly be justified?
She referred, Mr. Speaker, to a number of early incidents which have been condemned, and she will know that in respect of each of those incidents, the government has said that we want an independent and credible investigation and transparent conclusions so that we know why and how these acts took place.
Liam Bunn.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has said that the policy has not changed, but the facts on the ground have. Ordering the evacuation of 100,000 people is not a small operation. That is a big operation. Now, the Minister knows that the clear test for suspending arms sales is a clear risk of a breach of humanitarian law. But he's told the House this afternoon that he has got no assurances that that breach is impossible because he has not seen a plan. So can he tell the House what advice he has given to the Department for Business and Trade and when about their legal obligations to suspend arms sales now? And can he lay this out for us this afternoon before he comes before the Select Committee on the 21st of May to give evidence?
Well, the position on arms sales is very clear, and on legal advice also, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will be aware. And he knows that we always follow carefully, although we do not publish it, the legal advice, and we always act in accordance with it. And he will also know that in the light of that legal advice, as the Foreign Secretary announced on the 9th of April, the UK position with regard to export licences remains unchanged.
Andrew Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Gaza is bleeding and Gaza is starving. At least 34,700 people are dead, the majority of them women and children, while a man-made famine continues to take hold. How much further do things need to escalate before this government finally takes action, restores UNRWA funding and finally calls for an immediate ceasefire?
He raises the issue of UNRWA, as it was raised indeed by his honourable friend, and I should have responded on that point. Britain currently is in the position of not owing any money to UNRWA, and we have said that we are considering the Colonna report. We are waiting for the OIOS report. In due course, we will come to the House and tell the House the decision we have made. But it's important to recognise that at the current time, Britain is fully paid up in respect of UNRWA's money and work.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you. More than 14,500 children have been killed in Gaza. Is the Minister proud that the UK continues to sell arms for use in this action?
I am proud, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that Britain is doing everything it can. The government is bending every sinew to try and resolve this desperate situation, to try and make sure that we get aid into Gaza, flood Gaza with aid, as the Israeli government has promised, but also that we get the hostages out whose families have suffered so much since the appalling pogrom on October the 7th.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Deputy Foreign Secretary has said that he's still waiting to see the military plans from Israel in relation to Rafah. But we're all watching the consequences of the execution of those plans, which is already underway. As part of what we've seen overnight has been the very deliberate destruction of any signage that describes the territory as Gaza, and the taking down of Palestinian flags and replacing them with Israeli flags. That's not necessary in any way to neutralise any security threat. Has he asked Israel, what is it doing? Why has it done that? And can he give me one example of a consequence now that this red line has been crossed?
Well, we continue to make it clear to Israel that they should not, in these circumstances, be conducting military operations in Rafah until there is a proper plan which ensures that they stand by their duties and responsibilities under international humanitarian law.
Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thousands of children killed, hostages not released,
Israel accused of war crimes, global outrage at Israel's conduct, and Hamas very much in being. This is how not to fight a war. Even war has rules, Mr Deputy Speaker. So given the number of civilians sheltering in Rafah, can the Minister make clear UK government does not support the Rafah offensive?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I've made crystal clear where the government stands on the issue of any Rafah offensive, and we will continue to do everything we can, as I have clearly, I hope, set out to the House, to bring about an urgent resolution of this extraordinarily difficult and catastrophic situation.
Alistair Carmichael.
Mr Deputy Speaker, in recent months, Israeli forces in Gaza have been responsible for the killing of aid workers, medics, journalists, including British citizens amongst them. They've been responsible for the targeting of civilian infrastructure. In these circumstances, what possible basis can there be in law for continuing to supply weapons to Israel?
Mr Deputy Speaker, the decisions on weapons licences are not made across the floor of the House, nor are they made on the basis of emotion. They are made on the basis of the rules clearly set down. They are governed by the advice that we receive from lawyers, and we act in accordance with that advice.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. 1.4 million displaced people kettled in the south of the Gaza Strip, precisely where they were told to go, now facing mass starvation, a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding before our eyes. The Rafah offensive cannot and it must not be allowed to happen. The Deputy Foreign Secretary says he's yet to see a plan, credible or not. But a plan clearly exists if the Israeli authorities are asking 100,000 people to move. So can I ask the Deputy Foreign Secretary this? Given that he has not been clear to the House on consequences or indeed advice from officials, if there is a breach of international law, at which point is the British government also complicit?
Well, the government has made it clear that all countries, and Israel in this conflict, must abide by international humanitarian law. He will be well aware that there are consequences for not abiding by international humanitarian law, and Britain stands by its own international commitments in that respect and expects others to do likewise.
Gavin Newlands.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Minister said, "We have not seen a credible plan to protect civilians." This has been the case since the shameful atrocities of October the 7th. 7 months on and 35,000 deaths, we get the same lip service, the same drivel about urging Israel to follow international law, all whilst the Labour front bench gave them political cover. The UK shamefully continues to send arms to Israel, so if, as I think it will be, this is found to be a genocide and Netanyahu therefore a war criminal, this government and therefore this country will be complicit, will it not?
Yeah. Well, I think he uses lurid language, and I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, that he should recognise what the government is seeking to do together with our allies, both in the region and internationally, and support the government in that endeavour.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want the Deputy Foreign Secretary to imagine that he was in Rafah. If bombs were being dropped on his family and there was no safe place for them to go, I'm sure he would want governments like ours to use every available lever to stop the attack that he would rightly expect to receive protection. So why is it different for Palestinians? What will it take for this government to call for an immediate ceasefire, stop arms sales to Israel, and hold Netanyahu to account for his war crimes?
She is right, Mr Deputy Speaker, to set out the jeopardy of the family which she describes in Rafah. And that is why, on so many different fronts, the government, along with its allies, is trying to bring about a resolution to these matters. The fact that so far we have not been fully successful in that endeavour should not deter us from continuing to try to do the right thing in these respects.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister
raises concerns about misrepresentation. So let us be clear, those protesting in Israel in support of the hostages were protesting against Netanyahu and his approach in Rafah. Well, that was not the impression that the minister gave. Those protesters, those hostage families, recognise, as this House does, that military action in Rafah, the man-made famine, the displacement of 100,000 people to a place where they're trying to put tents up in rubble, is not going to lead to the release of hostages. It's not going to lead to a two-state solution. It will probably lead to further war crimes. The UK cannot sit this out. So will the minister at least be honest? He won't tell us why he won't suspend arms sales. Will he tell us whether our intelligence shows that to date British-made weapons and technology have been used in Rafah? Yes or no?
Well, she asks me at the beginning of her question about the demonstrations, the extensive demonstrations that have been seen in Israel. And she is right about that, and that is why I said in my earlier answer that there was a plurality of views in Israel, and many of those views do not coincide with the views of Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There is nowhere safe for people in Rafah. There is no relief for people in northern Gaza who are starving as aid is being choked off again. The situation in Gaza is intolerable and there are clear breaches of international law. None of this serves the cause of peace or hastens the release of the hostages. So I ask the Deputy Foreign Secretary, who has been short on detail today, where is the accountability, and specifically what actions is he taking to ensure the implementation of the UN Security Council resolution requiring a ceasefire and the ICJ interim judgment?
Well, I've clarified one aspect of the ICJ interim judgment, which I think I hope is helpful to the House. But in respect to the details which she says are lacking today, I would put it to her and to the House that we have been very open and very clear about what we expect to happen. We have argued and we have used our money and our influence diplomatically to make progress in this matter, and we will continue to do so.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Deputy Foreign Secretary knows that international law applies to all, or it matters to none. Of course, he speaks of the right of self-defence, and the House would agree with that, but what we've seen is far beyond self-defence. Now, outside of all the noise around that day, on the 21st of February, this House set out its position, and it said in black and white, no ifs, no buts, we do not support the offensive into Rafah. And that is the position of this House as we stand here today. Now, can I ask him, given what he said, and it's quite clear that he doesn't believe that an offensive into Rafah would meet international law, is he in that circumstance content with UK-supplied arms being used in that offensive? And if not, what will he do about it?
Well, I've made it very clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, where the government stands in respect of arms sales. There is a strong precedent for the way we handle these issues, which certainly was pursued by the party opposite when they were in government, and we will continue to operate in precisely the way I have set out to the House in the future.
Sian Mora.
Mr Speaker, the consequences of Israel's offensive for the Palestinians are absolutely clear. Death, destruction, starvation, disease on a scale even greater than the horrors that we have already witnessed. But I think it beggars belief that the Deputy Foreign Secretary comes to this House and cannot set out any consequences for Israel of that offensive. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are here because our constituents hold us to account for what is happening in Gaza. Why does he refuse to hold Israel to account for what is happening there?
Well, I do not recognise, Mr Deputy Speaker, her description on the question of accountability. We have been very clear on accountability in this House to all sides in this appalling conflict, and we will continue to be so.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Aid workers returning from Gaza, the first thing they talk about is the smell, because there are rivers of sewage in Gaza at the moment. The assault on Rafah means displacing people from a place with very poor sanitation to a place with no sanitation and catastrophic health outcomes. Only UNRWA can provide the sanitation needs at scale to solve this. The EU, Australia, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Iceland, Japan and Sweden have all restored funding to UNRWA. The Deputy Foreign Secretary has talked about the zero sum with UNRWA, but it needs to be fully restored and increased to stop this health and sanitation catastrophe. Why won't the government increase funding to UNRWA?
Well, I've made clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, the process the government is going through in respect of its commitments to UNRWA in the future. But I've also made clear that as far as the current situation is concerned, we have fully funded and met our commitments to UNRWA, and we will make decisions in the future when we have completed our review of the Kelowna inquiry and the OIOS report from the United Nations.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The earlier comment that Israel should get on and finish the job sent a chill through this chamber and through the homes of millions of people in our country, because they know what that means. It means the increased numbers of children being massacred in Rafah, and I'd like the Deputy Foreign Secretary to distance himself from that comment. But given the evidence in the High Court, which says that the UK government has not received any legal advice on potential violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza since 29th of February, can the Minister say what confidence he has that the £13 million worth of aerial target equipment licensed for sale to Israel at the end of 2022, or the £10 million worth of military support vehicle sales approved in May last year, will not result in the death of civilians in Rafah?
On his first point, Mr Deputy Speaker, any member of the House who asks a question is responsible for what they say and how they say it, and I, from this dispatch box, gave an answer to all the questions that have been asked, whether he approves of them or not. And on the second point he makes, where he with great skill seeks to flush out a different answer, I have nothing to add to what I've already said on the subject of arms sales.
Patrick Grady.
Speaker, at a recent event in Glasgow, I heard the parish priest of Gaza describe the situation as almost like hell on earth. If an individual were to escape that hell in Gaza and make their way to the UK by irregular means, because there is no humanitarian visa, there is no safe and legal route, is it the government's position that such a person should be deported to Rwanda?
Well, he asked me a hypothetical question, Mr Deputy Speaker, and when he comes up with a specific case where there is a need for a response, I will of course give it to him.
The Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Like most people here, I want to see an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages and access to humanitarian aid. But quite frankly, I've been absolutely gobsmacked by the Deputy Foreign Secretary's response. I see no levers that the government is using to influence the Israeli government in their behaviour. And I see this playing of words around what our obligations are under international law about our arms licensing process. As I'm reading it here from the UN, if there is a plausible risk of genocide, we should not be supplying arms to any country. The ICJ has already ruled that there is a plausible risk of genocide. So will the Deputy Foreign Secretary stop dancing on the head of a pin and do something about this?
Well, at the heart of her question, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the throwing across the chamber the use of the word genocide, which I do not think is helpful. But if she had heard what I had said earlier, I specifically, I hope, was helpful to the House in showing why what she said about the ICJ and genocide was totally inaccurate by quoting the former president of the ICJ.
James Murray.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. We need an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and a massive surge of aid going to all parts of Gaza. As we have warned for months now, an Israeli offensive in Rafah would be catastrophic and it must not go ahead. So what is the UK government doing to make sure there is maximum international pressure to stop this offensive from happening and to urgently secure an agreement that includes an immediate ceasefire?
He makes the point that everyone wants to see a pause in the fighting, a sustainable ceasefire, aid getting in very significant volumes, and the hostages getting out. And that is the policy of the British government. We are doing everything we can, together with our allies, to achieve those aims, and we will continue to do so.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, Israel has a right to defend its people, a right to have the 135 hostages released, a right to destroy the 4 Hamas battalions that are still operating, whose goal is to murder everyone who is Israeli or of Jewish origin. But following the devastating breakdown of ceasefire talks, will the Minister outline how government can continue to work with Israel to see the hostages released and the end to hostilities, bearing in mind that families on both sides of the Gaza conflict are grieving and want an end to bloodshed and want a future for all their children?
Well, as ever, my honourable friend accurately, in his first 3 points, sets out the situation. And in respect of his final point, we will continue to work with everyone to try and achieve a resolution to these issues in the way I've set out today.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Having promised that Rafah would provide safe sanctuary, they now demand that the Palestinians must leave. Having frustrated humanitarian aid, they have now seized and closed the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings. Having killed 100 journalists, they have now seized and closed down Al Jazeera in Gaza. On Israel's government, the former US Middle East envoy, Dennis Ross, stated today that, and I quote, "At a certain point, Netanyahu needs to choose Biden over Ben-Gvir and the hostages over Smotrich." Does the government agree with Ambassador Ross that we are at that moment?
Minister. Well, we listen to everyone who comments on these matters, and we have, throughout these appalling circumstances, been at a number of critical points. But he made the point at the beginning of his remarks that getting aid in through entry points which are currently shut is vitally important. We completely agree with that. It's why we've supported the maritime and the air initiatives, but opening up these entry points remains the most important and most effective way of getting aid and humanitarian relief to desperate people.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Everyone in this House knows aid trickling into Gaza has been a stop-start affair, but a critical lifeline to support Palestinian civilians nonetheless. Today, that lifeline has been cut off yet again. So my question to the Minister is, does this represent a failure of this government's policy? Does it amount to a breach of international humanitarian law? And, like everybody else, what will the consequences be?
Well, the government is always in favour of people being held to account for their actions. She will have gathered from what I've said today, but also on other occasions from this dispatch box, that where there is a need for a transparent inquiry, the government always stands up for it. She mentioned the fact that aid has trickled in. She will know that part of the government's intensive efforts have been to try and ensure that aid volume is increased. She will have heard what the Israeli government said about flooding Gaza with aid, and we are doing everything we can to increase the flow and hold the Israeli government to account for what they have committed to do in respect of aid entering Gaza.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. We all want to see an immediate ceasefire by all parties and the release of all hostages. The UN reports that cases of acute malnutrition amongst children continue to rise due to shortage of food, deteriorating health, water and sanitation, and of fear and stress undermining the ability of mothers to breastfeed their babies. Aid through Rafah has been very limited, and now that route has been cut off. So can the Minister tell us, does he consider the cutting off of aid routes to the civilian population a breach of the ICJ's interim report?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are trying to ensure that we get aid in a number of different ways. She will have heard me set out what those ways are, and I think we've taken advantage of all the opportunities we can find to increase the amount of aid getting into Gaza, and we will continue to do everything we can to intensify that approach.
Peter Grant.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the remit of the International Criminal Court doesn't only extend to war criminals in the Israeli government and in Hamas. It extends to any government that has failed to take reasonable steps to prevent these atrocities. The Minister may be happy to hide behind the defence of my lawyer said it was okay, but does he respect, first of all, the right of UK civil servants to take their own independent legal advice in these matters, and will he give an assurance that no British civil servant will be put under any pressure to do anything if they honestly believe that it contributes to crimes against humanity or war crimes in Gaza?
Mr Deputy Speaker, the roles and rights of British civil servants in these matters are very clearly codified, and the government respects that absolutely.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Foreign Secretary for coming here today and responding to the urgent question for almost, well, a few minutes short of an hour and a half. Thank you very much. Point of order, Sir Michael Ellis.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's on this topic. Sir Robert Choate, the chair of the UK Statistics Authority, published a letter on Friday pointing out the uncertainties and bias as regards the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health casualty statistics. Many academic statisticians have also pointed out, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Hamas figures are metronomically linear and obviously fabricated. Honourable members in this House on all sides have used these terrorist figures, some with careless abandon, but Sir Robert has said, and I quote, "It would be desirable for ministers, shadow ministers and other parliamentarians to state the source of any estimates they use in the public domain and to recognise their limitations." Will you, Mr Deputy Speaker, advise members in this House to heed the urging of the UK Statistics Authority and be highly cautious about using Hamas casualty statistics?
I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for his point of order and giving forward notice of it. As he knows, comments made in this chamber by members is not the responsibility of the Chair, but he has successfully put his own view on the record. Thank you very much. Right. In which case we're now going to move on to the statement, and I call Secretary of State for Defence, Grant Shapps.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to update the House on a data incident involving activity by a malign actor. In recent days, the Ministry of Defence has identified indications that a malign actor gained access to part of the Armed Forces payment network. This is an external system completely separate to the MOD's core network, and it's not connected to the main military HR system. The House will wish to note that it is operated by a contractor, and there is evidence of potential failings by them, which may have made it easier for the malign actor to gain entry. A specialist security review of the contractor and their operations is underway, and appropriate steps will be taken. The contractor-operated system in question is held and holds personal data of regular and reserve personnel and some recently retired veterans. This includes names and bank details, and in a smaller number of cases, addresses. In response to this incident, Mr Deputy Speaker, we've undertaken significant and immediate action, enacting a multi-point response plan to support and protect our people, and I'd like to provide the House with details of this 8-point plan this afternoon. First of all, we've immediately taken the system offline, and this has secured it against similar future threats. Secondly, we've launched a full investigation, drawing on Cabinet Office support and specialist external expertise to examine the potential failings of the contractor and to minimise the risk of similar incidents in the future. 3, whilst our initial investigations have found no evidence that any data has been removed, as a precaution, we have today alerted those service personnel affected through the chain of command. In addition, we're also sending out letters to a small number of veterans who've retired and who may have been affected as an additional precaution. The House will wish to note the vast majority of the UK veterans community are, however, unaffected. 4, specialist advice and guidance on data security has been shared and will be available on Gov.uk later today. 5th, we've additionally set up a helpline to support individuals. The number for the helpline is 01249 596 6 65, and that helpline will be available from today. 6, we're providing a commercial personal data protection service for all service personnel. And this facility will constantly monitor each individual's personal data and notify them if there are any irregularities. Even though we don't believe that their information has been stolen, we intend to do this in order to bring further peace of mind. 7, welfare and financial advice is available where needed through each individual's chain of command. And 8, on becoming aware of the incident, MOD stopped the processing of all payments and isolated the system. And I want to provide further detail on this particular step. We're making changes to the system to ensure it is secure before recommencing payments through it, of course. And I can confirm, though, that in the meantime, all April salaries have been paid. Some service personnel will have experienced a slight delay in receiving some expense payments. However, we expect this to be fully resolved today with the money in their accounts by Friday. Furthermore, I can confirm that we are ensuring all high-value payments remain unaffected. For example, all outstanding Forces Help to Buy and terminal benefit payments have been facilitated by alternative secure transfer. As mentioned, salary payments and pensions for veterans have not been affected, and we do not expect them to be in the future. Mr. Deputy Speaker, for reasons of national security, we can't release further details of the suspected cyber activity behind this incident. However, I can confirm to the House that we do have indications that this was the suspected work of a malign actor, and we cannot rule out state involvement. This incident is further proof that the UK is facing rising and evolving threats, and as I set out in my speech in Lancaster House in January, the world is, I'm afraid, becoming somewhat more dangerous. Last month, the government therefore announced an increase in defence spending to meet these new threats, reaching 2.5% of GDP by the end of the decade. Mr. Deputy Speaker, following this incident, I can also announce today that although this incident is entirely unrelated to our own MOD networks, we are also reviewing all personnel data to ensure our people's data is secure. This was the work, as I say, of a malign actor who compromised a contractor-run network entirely separate from the MOD core system. However, as I've said, we cannot at this stage rule out state involvement from elsewhere. This 8-point plan outlines the immediate and significant action we're taking to protect the most precious resource, our people. And even though this has occurred on a contractor system with a malign actor involved, and we can't rule out that foreign state involvement, I want to apologise to the men and women who are affected by this. It should not have happened, and this 8-point plan seeks to ensure that it is put right and that it cannot happen again. I commend the statement to the House.
John Healy. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There is deep concern in this House about the grave security breach, and the House will accept and note the Defence Secretary's apology to Armed Forces personnel. So we welcome the Defence Secretary's statement this afternoon and his multi-point plan, and thank him for early sight of it. There will indeed be serious concern in the MOD that news of this big data breach was splashed across the media before the Defence Secretary could set out the facts to Parliament. And my overriding concern is for the safety of serving personnel and veterans affected, worried about the risk to them and their families, hearing first about the data being hacked from the media and not from the MOD. Our military put their own security at risk when they serve on the front line, and the very last thing they should have to worry about is their data security back home. Any such hostile action against our forces is utterly unacceptable, and their protection must be the first order priority for the Defence Secretary, whether on operations abroad or for their data at home. Despite the Defence Secretary's statement, he still has many serious questions to answer. On the breach itself, Who held the data that was hacked? When was it discovered? When were ministers told? How was it leaked to the press? On the contractor, Defence Business Services say Shared Services Connected Limited has the MOD contract for core payroll and other business services. How many contracts does SSCL or its parent company, Sopra Steria, have with the MOD? What action has been taken by other government departments with similar SSCL contracts? On forces personnel, how many serving personnel and veterans have been hit by the hack? Has every serving full-timer and reservist been affected? And what support is being offered? On last night's media reports, has a leak inquiry been launched? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the MOD's data security record is getting worse while threats against the UK continue to rise. There has been a threefold increase in MOD data breaches in the last 5 years, with 35 separate MOD breaches reported to the Information Commissioner's Office and a £350,000 fine last December. Subcontractors are well known as the soft underbelly of security, and this latest hack raises serious questions about how the MOD manages its outsourced services. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the media have clearly been briefed that China is behind the hack, but the Defence Secretary only tells us about a malign actor. Now, the government rightly has a very rigorous system before official accusations or attributions are made. But if this data breach is found to be carried out by a hostile state, it would represent a very serious threat to our national security. And the government have been warned. The ISC committee confirmed in its China report last year, cyber attacks by hostile states now happen daily, and our wider armed forces community are being targeted. But the committee also found no cross-government China strategy, completely inadequate resourcing and defence intelligence with no systematic record of resources focused on China. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Defence Secretary knows. We are united in this House. We will not stand for any such attacks. And with threats increasing, such flaws in our cybersecurity must be fixed. Only then will we make Britain secure at home and strong abroad.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his words about the united way in which this House tackles issues like this. And actually, there's much of what he said that I can agree with. He asked a number of questions. I'll try and just rattle off some responses to him. The chosen day to announce this was today in order to ensure that we would be able to secure the systems and back up, make sure everyone had their payments made, even if it weren't through those systems. So the media release last night was coincidental and unwelcome as far as we were concerned. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of people were involved in this. He asked how many, 272,000 is the number of personnel who have been affected. To stress that means that it's up to that number, the number still being refined. It will probably end up lower, but nonetheless it's a large number of people, and people may have noticed that bank payments weren't made, so some of the media will have picked up on that. He's right to say that personnel and their welfare is our absolute first and primary priority, and we absolutely agree with that, which is why I hope he'll agree that the 8-point plan heavily focuses and consists of ensuring that they are getting every bit of help and support required, including, although we don't think that the data is necessarily stolen, making the assumption that it has been in order to ensure that they're getting support required, and including through their own data monitoring services that we're providing to each and every one of them, whether affected or not in this particular case. He has named the contractor that was involved. I can confirm that's the correct name, SSCL. And as I mentioned in my comments, we have both ordered a full review of their work within MOD, but have gone further than that as well, and I've requested from the Cabinet Office a full review of their work across government as well as within MOD, which is underway. I also made mention briefly to specialists being brought in to carry out investigation in forensic sense against the way that this has operated. Data breaches and the level of attack is nothing new, but he is right to point out, and the House will be aware, these attacks are growing to the extent that the MOD and its networks are under attack millions of times per day, and they successfully repel those attacks millions of times per day. I want to stress again, particularly for servicemen and women watching or listening, that this does not contain data which is on main MOD systems, which is of even greater concern to us, therefore. And it is right that we invest in protecting the systems to make sure that these data attacks cannot be successful and are repelled. And I would gently say to the right honourable gentleman, as I think he might expect me to, that one of the best ways to do that is to invest in defence, which is why we are committed to 2.5% increase with a fixed timeline and a plan to pay for that, because it does mean that we'll be able to do more things, including investing further in cybersecurity.
Jeremy Quinn.
Mr Deputy Speaker, SSCL was a joint venture with the Cabinet Office. I think there was a legacy minority stake held until last year, and as is public, the other it also provides services from memory to the Metropolitan Police, the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice. So I absolutely welcome the fact that the Minister is saying this is going to be across government. Absolutely all areas of government that is exposed needs to be doing the necessary. What specialist support is the Secretary of State receiving from elsewhere in government, and when might the malign actor be named?
Mr Deputy Speaker, as my honourable friend will know, the process of getting towards naming, if indeed there is a state-sponsored actor involved, is a specific process set out by the Butler reforms, and does take some time to reach those conclusions. But he asked specifically about the work that will be ongoing with the particular contractor. The Cabinet Office calling in specialist analysts who will be carrying out that work over the coming weeks. And these are two separate tracks. So you've got both the contractor within MOD, but separately in different places across government that he rightly identifies. And I just want to sort of stress to the House, because I suspect this will be brought up quite a number of times, we expect very high standards from our contractors working with the lives and livelihoods of our service personnel, so we would take all appropriate actions.
Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I also thank the Secretary of State for advance notice as well. There isn't really much to disagree with the questions from the Shadow Defence Secretary, I have to say. I maybe take just one little bit extra. But in addition to what the Secretary of State said in relation to a malign actor, I'm sure maybe the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green won't miss the wall when he asks the Secretary of State a question, as I see that he is bobbing. So let me maybe come back to the contractor, because there is a bit of a concern here, because they already have previous when it comes to delivering government contracts. Notably, I believe, a scandal over NHS business services and the running of immigration application systems. So can the Secretary of State advise the House, given the seriousness of this issue in terms of the Ministry of Defence, do they have confidence that the contractor is able to continue to deliver this contract? And would they give a consideration to a review of this specific contract armed forces payment network element, that it should be brought back in-house, delivered by the MOD, and not delivered by some conglomerate based in Paris?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I can confirm, obviously, that there is already that review underway, and I can go further by saying that I am deeply interested in the way that, of course, this contractor, or indeed any others, behaves. I can't jump straight to the conclusion of that research, and I don't think he would expect me to jump straight to the conclusion of the security review. But to answer his question in a more straightforward way, if it were found that there were a better way to do this, and we can't be satisfied on security, then of course we would consider the other options, such as the ones he suggested.
Alicia Cairns.
Mr Deputy Speaker, with 1 in 5 residents of Rutland being veteran or serving, this news will be very concerning to our communities. But in the last 6 weeks, the Chinese Communist Party has concluded to be responsible for hacking our armed forces, conducting a cyber attack on the Electoral Commission, cyber attacks on French and British MPs, a German aide was arrested on espionage charges, and 2 British men were charged with obtaining information useful to an enemy. Attacking our institutions and people who defend or represent our people is not the act of an ally or a friend, and the police, the British police, have explicitly deemed this the actions of an enemy. So what is my right honourable friend doing to make sure we finally get a cross-government consensus and get the Foreign Office changing our position on this? These are not the acts of a friend or an ally. These are the actions of a country who considers itself anathema to our values, our activities, and those who defend our interests.
Well, my honourable friend knows that we take the view that it is absolutely wrong for members of Parliament to be in any way sanctioned by other countries. And I know that she has been sanctioned. I've been sanctioned in other areas, not by that particular country. And she's right to point out those cases that have been proven, including when the Deputy Prime Minister stood at this dispatch box and talked about electoral data recently. However, it is not the case in this circumstance, and I don't want to mislead the House that the connection, that there is a proven connection. And I do just want to stress that although we can see a malign actor is involved, we have yet to make the full connection to a state. Although, as I pointed out in my statement, I can't rule out that that might be the conclusion. We have no evidence to conclude that way yet.
Derek Twigg. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Secretary of State, when did the MOD last carry out an audit or review of the security precautions put in place to stop a cyber attack with this contractor, if it did at all?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can tell them actually specific to the MOD estate that we do it all the time, as in every day. With regard to this particular contract, I am also aware that we have been in contact with them about their cybersecurity arrangements. For the purposes of national security, I can't go into the detail in this House, but I can perhaps provide them with a little bit of further context, if that's helpful separately.
So Julian Lewis.
I welcome the fact that the helpline has been established so quickly and encourage the government to be proactive in publishing advice on what people can do to secure their bank accounts, for example. But what specialist advice does the MOD routinely seek before outsourcing data on service personnel to external contractors? And what standards must be verified before such outsourcing to a civilian organisation is allowed to take place?
Well, it is obviously completely unacceptable for a contractor to leave our brave servicemen and women in this position. So we take it incredibly seriously and are very concerned by what has happened. He asks about the checks. Of course, this is a contract which long predates current ministers, but we're of course checking through the details of that at considerable speed, because as you can imagine, we think the contractor has very many questions to answer, and I know that the ones that he asks will be included in those answers.
Neil Cole.
Mr. Speaker, the Intelligence and Security Committee reported last year that the government was not protecting the UK sufficiently against cyber attacks, including from China, including specifically on our armed forces. The Minister says he's sorry today, but why did he fail to listen?
Well, as I mentioned a few moments ago, we actually successfully defend against millions of attacks, millions and millions of attacks each day at the MOD, and in common with all critical national infrastructure, other departments, many businesses, the threat is very real. It's one of the reasons that on this side of the House we've committed to increasing, with a timeline attached, to 2.5% of our GDP, because we will have more money to spend on defending. Now, it's one thing to wish that defence, it's another thing to actually act, which is what we've done on this side.
So Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I welcome my honourable friend to the dispatch box. Can I just raise a particular point with him? We know now that the British government was warned by the security services in America nearly 2 years ago that the Electoral Commission's system was hacked, and also that a number of MPs had also been hacked here in the UK. We now discover that in that 2-year period, the government said nothing about China's role in all of this. It was China, and they were warned at the time. We now know, in fact, that far more MPs, nearly 40, were actually hacked, and that was never reported. So I have a concern, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that although the government now refuses to say who it is, we may spend another 2 years before we ever discover or say publicly. So can I ask him this very simple question? Given that the FBI director himself has said China has a cyber espionage capacity so vast that it dwarfs everybody else, knowing now the record, as the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee said, of all the attacks directly on us here, can I ask him why, given in 2023, the Deputy Prime Minister said the government was considering placing the People's Republic of China into the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, given all of that, why in heaven's name don't we take the decision to place this malign actor into that enhanced place and then make sure we deal with them accordingly?
Well, I do welcome my right honourable friend's comments about attribution. I think it's absolutely right. Where MPs have been hacked, where the electoral register is hacked, he's encouraging me at the dispatch box to therefore jump to the conclusion that the malign actor involved is China as well. And I'm simply unable to do that at this stage. You'd expect me to follow due process, but I rather support his view that if attribution is required, that should happen in a timely and speedy manner. And I will undertake from this dispatch box to ensure that in this case that is what happens, and that we do not get into a situation where many months or years pass by without it being mentioned.
Richard Ford. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The malign actor didn't need to access the Armed Forces payment network to find out the salary of a British private soldier. A quick search of Google, or indeed Baidu, would reveal that a salary for a British soldier on completion of initial training is less than £24,000 per year, less than the average UK salary of £35,000 per year. Russia is currently paying a starting salary to its soldiers of over 2.5 million rubles for fighting in Ukraine. Will the data breach by this Conservative government's contractor shame the government into paying some of our lowest paid service people a decent salary?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was creative, if nothing else. I would say that to the honourable gentleman, the fact that we paid a nearly 10% pay increase, 9.7% last year, to many ranks of our armed forces, and the fact that this party is committed to 2.5%, with a path to it, a pledge which I've not heard repeated from over there, rather suggests that we're prepared to do something about pay and retention. I haven't heard the same from the parties opposite.
James Gray. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the great seriousness with which the Secretary of State is taking this appalling breach of data. It really has been awful. I'm glad he's doing it taking it so seriously. I'm also convinced that the prime contractors have all got very significant cybersecurity requirements. It's extremely unlikely that a prime contractor would be hacked in this way. But my understanding is that subcontractors and subcontractors down the food chain do not have the same level of cyber control at all. They have to fulfill something called the Cyber Essentials Accreditation, but even that is not compulsory. Will the Secretary of State now undertake to look into the way in which subcontractors and subcontractors are checked for cybersecurity and potentially make this accreditation compulsory rather than voluntary?
I think the concerning thing about this particular incident is that SSCL would be in this context, a primary rather than a subcontractor, but he's absolutely right to raise the wider issue, and yes is the answer. Our intention and indeed our instruction now is to go right the way through. As I said in my initial comments, we take this incredibly seriously. It is unacceptable for this to have happened, and we will take every possible measure once we got to the forensic truth of what's happened here, including against the contractor and indeed any subcontractors.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I can understand why the Secretary of State is reluctant to name China, but it seems I think every member in this room believes that they are probably responsible for this, and certainly that's what the media are reporting. So I do hope he's able to commit to a very clear timescale when he can come back with some clarity on that. But I want to just ask him about the point that's been made by a number of other members about how the outsourced contractors are clearly the weak spot in our system. Is he committing to examine and analyse every single subcontractor with a view to looking at bringing them back in-house in light of the threats that we're now facing?
Yes, of course, the MOD, as with most militaries, uses a lot of contractors and subcontractors. But to answer his question directly, yes, the answer is that the review will encompass all of that work. And yes, if we find or believe that we can do this better, and I think many members may conclude that this wouldn't have happened had it been held in the MOD and through our own systems, then that is indeed what we would endeavour to do.
Bob Seeley.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Minister for his call this morning. It is a little frustrating to be told that one's bank details and national insurance number are winging their way to Beijing or wherever they've gone. And considering I was also caught up in the IPAC breach, I'm wondering if I'm currently in the running for being the most hacked MP in Britain. Can I just ask a quick question? If it was a weak security with the contractor, does that mean it was not a state actor? And if this contractor had a high level of security, do we now assume, or do we assume it is more likely that there is a state actor behind it? And if there is a state actor behind it, we assume it's China because China has form in stealing mass data, and they've done it with the US federal government, for instance. Thank you.
Well, can I start by thanking my honourable and gallant friend for his service, and I'm sorry that he had to receive that phone call about what's happened. I do want to stress, actually, that we do not believe the data has necessarily been stolen, and so there is a danger here of just running a couple of steps ahead. What we've done is to respond with the 8-point plan as if it has been stolen, because we think that that is the best position to put everybody, himself included, in, given the seriousness of this potential breach. I will struggle to answer the detail of the rest of his questions for the national security reasons that I hope he'll understand. But once again, we'll undertake that the next stage of this, which is actually a process set out with the Butler reforms, is carried out quickly and efficiently.
Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know that the government considers it likely that China is responsible for this hack, coming hot on the heels of the revelation that they were also responsible for the hack of the Electoral Commission, as confirmed in March of this year. If it does transpire that China are again responsible for this, will the government finally stop talking tough on China, labelling them an epoch-defining challenge, and start acting accordingly, taking serious measures up to and, for instance, diplomatic expulsions?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think I've outlined the government's position on this a couple of times, but I do want to say he says consider it likely. I'm saying I can't rule it out, and those are two different things. We do need to allow for this forensic work to go ahead before we start attributing. But clearly, if there is attribution, then there are also consequences.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, at least it wasn't Capita. But this will be very worrying for service personnel, their families, and veterans. And they'll be disrespected that the government seems to have briefed that it was China overnight and then not had the nerve to confirm that in the House today because someone rang up from the Foreign Office and said, don't do that. When, oh when, are we going to start standing up to the Chinese in a way that they clearly are not frightened to stand up to us?
I do just indeed, it's not his favourite contractor on this particular occasion, as he says, but nonetheless, we will be carrying out a very comprehensive review of their work. And I just want to again make it absolutely clear to the House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we did absolutely everything that we could to avoid this being made public until I had the opportunity to come to this House. We proactively endeavoured to ensure that our own approach towards removing the data from being online, closing that system down, ensuring the personnel were paid, making sure that the alternative payments system were in place for expenses and other things, and all of that could happen ideally before we came to this House. We most certainly did not wish to see nor brief out the story. Unfortunately, because there were a large number of people impacted or potentially impacted, it was almost impossible to expect for the people not to then go and talk about it, and I believe that's how it has come into the public domain. But my honourable friend's absolutely right about this. I mean, he is a champion for ensuring that these contractors do the jobs that they're actually paid to do. And we are now crawling through all of the detail. And as I've said before, we will not leave this hanging. We will take every appropriate action. Because as you might imagine, I, as Defence Secretary, and the entire team are very concerned about the welfare of our personnel and the brave men and women who do not deserve to have this happen to them, and we do not want to see it happen in the name of the MOD either.
Jim Shannon.
I thank the Secretary of State very much for his statement and for his positive response to try and assure our personnel. Having seen this type of data breach in Northern Ireland with the PSNI, information on officers and staff leaked, and the stress was palatable. What steps are the Secretary of State and Government taking to ensure that the staff feel safe and protected, and that there is funding available for service personnel protection if necessary? Thank you.
I think one of the big differences in this particular case is this is not someone who was like a member of the armed forces or personnel who did something wrong. This was done to them. It wasn't someone opening an attachment or something of that nature. This is something that has happened through the system that the contractor ran. He's absolutely right to focus, as I hope I have and I think the whole House has today, on the personnel themselves and what it means to them, and in particular to be reassuring them this afternoon. And I'm grateful for the attitude and approach of the House, because I think it will have largely done that for service personnel and women. I won't reiterate each of the 8 points, but both through the chain of command, the phone number that is available now, the information going on Gov.uk, and the wraparound services, including the fraud checking access that they'll now individually have access to. Through all of those things and many others, I hope it does bring reassurance, remembering that we don't think that the data is necessarily stolen, but that we are behaving as if it is in order to provide absolute security.
Bernard Jenkin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for coming so speedily to this House with a great deal in his statement about what action is being taken, but can I express both concern about reluctance to name the malign actor, but also the tendency about the tendency of things to get lost in the Cabinet Office, which has become such a morass of activities. Who in the Cabinet Office is charged with this responsibility? Is it the National Security Advisor? Which Cabinet Committee is overseeing this? Would it be the National Security Council itself? And I hope so. And who is the DCDS responsible for cybersecurity? And who will be responsible for making sure that all these elements are working together to conduct this review very thoroughly? And can I suggest that he brings forward a white paper very shortly on the lessons learned from this incident and others to provide the reassurance that not least our service personnel need?
Yes, well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I just want to stress again, it's not that I'm reluctant to name the malign actor, it's that we need more information before I can do so. So it's not a sort of trying to avoid telling the House this information, it's we need to be certain before we're able to do that. He asked who in the Cabinet Office. I spoke directly with the Deputy Prime Minister on this to make sure that it's set from the very highest levels. And he asked who has overall responsibility. The excellent Chief of Defence people, Phil Halley, has responsibility. He's very, very good. He has chaired now, I think we're up to 11 meetings internally on this in order to get everything ready for this afternoon. As I said before, it's really with deep regret that we didn't quite make it into today before news of this started to break late last night. But he is responsible and will continue to be responsible for efforts.
James Sunderland.
Mr Deputy Speaker, thank you. As an affected veteran myself, I do feel that responsibility of representing and championing my former colleagues in this matter. So could the Defence Secretary please assure me in 3 particular areas? Firstly, the appropriate diplomatic protest has or will be made to the guilty party. Secondly, that assurance will be given to the House in due course that the firewall protocols given to defence contractors will match or exceed that given to the MOD itself. And thirdly, that the information that's been hacked, if indeed it has been hacked, will be sacrosanct. In other words, that no malign actor can gain access to bank accounts after this event.
Well, thank my honourable and gallant friend. He makes 3 excellent points. I can absolutely assure him the guilty party will, as he puts it, sort of be brought to, or perhaps didn't quite put it, but be brought to book. I can also assure him that the MOD was not responsible for failing to issue correct instructions in terms of the contractual requirements to keep this data safe. I just want to say that I will, because I strongly feel the House on all sides have pushed this point hard. I will make sure this does not get buried or lost in a process, and I will return to this House. I can't promise to do that in the next few days. It will take a while to do because the Butler process takes a while, but I will not allow it to drop, and the House has my undertaking on that issue.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I just delve into how veterans are being reassured that their data isn't being used, for example, by financial scammers? As a former Royal Air Force veteran myself, I'm proudly president of the RAF's Association in Huddersfield, and I know this is an issue they'll be very, very worried about. And will he be using forces charities like RAFA, the Royal British Legion, the RF Benevolent Fund, SAFA, and many more to reassure veterans that their data won't be used by financial scammers?
Yeah, my honourable friend will be pleased to hear we have actually written to each of those organisations today actually to enlist their support, but also to provide the detail and information to them that the House has been privy to this afternoon. And in answer to this specific question, we have a commercial organisation who will now be monitoring the personal data for the individuals affected. That would include, for example, if it was used in a suspicious way, if it appeared on the dark web or any other outcome. So in a way, there will be an additional layer of security attached to these individuals. Again, I can confirm that as of this moment, we've seen no suspicious activity at all on those accounts.
Sir John Redwood.
Is there any indication of how the thief wanted to use this data if they have actually got it? And have all the staff been advised to change accounts and passwords and access to internet in every way so that no harm of a further nature can occur?
The answer is no to the first point. There's no indication. And to the second point, yes, our regular approach, and indeed as somebody with a MOD account, you have to change your passwords regularly to continue to use them. So those sort of security measures are in place. People don't need to change their bank accounts as a result of this. Apart from anything else, if somebody was going to use someone's bank details to make a payment somewhere else, that would be technically difficult to do in any way. Case to a new account, it would require two-factor authentication. So it's not necessary for people to change their accounts, and the monitoring service will provide an overlay of additional reassurance to them.
Tobias Alwood.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could I welcome the Defence Secretary's statement here today in qualifying the scale of this breach, but also the operational changes that he's going to introduce. More strategically, it does illustrate how the changing character of conflict is impacting our world, with the digital terrain being as important as the physical. But that said, had this been a physical, a kinetic attack on MOD main building, this place here would be demanding some form of proportionate response. Indeed, you could even argue that that would be an Article NATO 5 situation. So could I ask the Secretary of State to consider this bigger picture, because the rules of engagement, Geneva Conventions, are out of date. And the Secretary of State is absolutely right to say threats are rising and they are evolving. But we do need to address how errant nations are held to account and what constitutes a proportionate response to a cyber attack.
It's certainly true to say that there's a malign actor involved. We know that. It is possible, and I can't rule out that it's attached to a country. But as soon as I say that, everyone assumes it therefore is attached to a country, and I'm not in a position to confirm that at this point, simply because the work is required and it is incredibly detailed forensic work to get to that point. Of course, he's right that people, in some senses, differentiate between an attack which is a physical one, an attack which is a cyber attack, but both can be incredibly serious and have enormous consequences. Again, I want to stress in this case, because we don't believe that the information has in fact been stolen, and because we're monitoring it through these 8 different measures very carefully, there is a degree of we've caught it and controlling it. But his wider point is, of course, absolutely correct.
Jesse Norm.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has been absolutely clear about the serious nature of this breach, and he's said so several times in the dispatch box. He's also said that the contractor failed to follow MOD guidelines and therefore is culpable to some degree, as far as we can see so far. So my question is simply this. What sanctions are in place to penalise that contractor? And what sanctions will he apply at the limit if they are found to be in breach? And finally, since he's mentioned that addresses have also potentially been leaked, how many addresses roughly? Because I personally am deeply concerned not just about bank details, but about the safety and well-being of those soldiers.
Well, I absolutely share his concern about the safety and well-being of the soldiers. Thankfully, very few addresses is the answer, a very tiny number. But the point about the sanctions of what would happen, again, is slightly to jump the order of events. We have to actually be confident to be able to run through the audit trail of exactly what has happened. But I will, again, make it clear from this dispatch box that if it is the case that there has been negligence involved, and clearly I think he understands that the whole House will, that is our concern this afternoon, then we will take the strongest possible action as a result.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I seek my honourable friend's reassurance that there is cross-government working to identify the vulnerabilities in the system? We've heard this afternoon that because a subcontractor was involved, that was identified as being a vulnerable point. Recently, in my own constituency, in Dumfries and Galloway, my constituents had their medical records hacked because it was identified that it was a small rural authority and therefore more vulnerable. So are we across government, across the United Kingdom, actually seeking out these vulnerabilities to make our data safer from malign actors and indeed plain criminals?
Well, I certainly reassure my right honourable friend that the reason that I immediately asked the Cabinet Office to be involved is because although I can do those checks on that contractor and others across the MOD or MOD-related contracts, I can't do that across the rest of the government, but that is exactly the job that the Cabinet Office will now undertake. When data is stolen like this, or rather exposed and potentially stolen, it causes a great deal of concern, and what we want to do is make sure that cannot happen. And I just reiterate again, this is not data that was being held by the MOD systems, and it did not affect the MOD systems, but I recognise as Secretary of State that our responsibility extends to whomever is holding the data for our personnel. And again, I want to apologise to them. This should never have happened. And we will make sure that it is put right.
Richard Graham.
The Defence Secretary has reassured us that there's no evidence yet of any data having been removed, and there's no suggestion that the MOD's core system and HR network has been compromised. But can my right honourable friend confirm if there's any evidence yet of ransomware being used? What assessment has he made of any data being published? And although he reassured my right honourable friend for Hereford that the number of addresses that have been accessed is small, could he confirm that those veterans whose addresses have been accessed will be advised accordingly so they can take, if need be, security protections? And then lastly, on the wider points, can that telephone helpline be used by any who are concerned about late payment of miscellaneous expenses? And will he relay to the Deputy Prime Minister my strong view that actually the time is ripe for a cyber i.e. reinsurance, in the same way that we created flood re a while back, precisely to deal with the likely costs for smaller authorities like those that were alluded to of having to repair their cyber defences against such future attacks.
It's characteristic of my honourable friend to include 5 questions, and here's one. Ransomware, no evidence. Data published, no evidence. Very small number of addresses, and yes, those people will be contacted individually or as a group if need be. Late payments, this actually is unlikely to cause much of a difficulty. As I said, that will all be resolved by today. And money in people's accounts either now or by the end of the week. However, if personnel have experienced any particular issues, they should take that through an issue through their chain of command. The phone number is also available, and individual cases would be looked at on a case-by-case basis, as he would expect. I think he's probably taking me slightly out of my area on cyber re, which I think will be one for the Cabinet Office to consider. It sounds like a smart idea, but I'm afraid he's got me outside my tracks.
As he waited very patiently and asked the last 5 questions, I let him get away with it. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement today and for responding to questions for over 3/4 of an hour. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the 10-minute rule motion on motor vehicles driving licences new drivers. I call Kim Ledbetter.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about licences issued to new drivers for the period of 6 months after the issuing of the licence, for the purpose of increasing safety for road users and for connected purposes. Mr Deputy Speaker, since I was elected in 2021, road safety has been one of my top priorities as the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen. It's an issue which is frequently raised with me by concerned constituents. Speeding drivers, high-performance rental vehicles, off-road motorbikes and quad bikes, inconsiderate and dangerous parking and reckless driving blight our towns and villages. And not long after my election, our community was shocked by a tragic road traffic incident on Whiteley Road in Hetmondwike, in which a much-loved local woman lost her life. Our thoughts remain with her family and friends. I've therefore worked closely with the excellent Batley and Spen neighbourhood policing team, local councillors and Alison Lowe, the West Yorkshire Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, to support the Vision Zero strategy to eliminate fatal collisions on our roads. It's an ambitious target, but one which other regions and countries have shown is possible with the right measures and resourcing. But it requires a concerted effort to get there. Because despite all the positive road safety advances made in recent decades, from the installation of seatbelts and airbags to drink-drive testing, speed limits, speed cameras and MOTs, it is a tragic and horrifying fact that in Great Britain in 2022, there were 29,742 individuals killed or seriously injured on our roads. I am sure you will agree with me, Mr Deputy Speaker, that that is a startling statistic. And we must never forget that behind that statistic, there are thousands of families across the country grieving and going through unimaginable pain. Lives changed forever and families torn apart by tragic and often avoidable collisions. Indeed, I was inspired to bring this bill forward following a meeting between myself and colleagues with Dr Ian Greenwood, who 15 years ago tragically lost his 12-year-old daughter, Alice, in a horrific crash involving a young, inexperienced driver. The 18-year-old driver was racing 4 of his friends at night time on a rural road when they crashed into the car carrying Ian's 2 children and their mother. Her sister and mum were seriously injured and Alice was killed. The 18-year-old driver and a 16-year-old passenger were also killed. 3 young lives lost. In the face of such enormous personal grief, Ian has steadfastly and courageously campaigned for road safety reform, including the introduction of graduated driving licences. Sadly, Ian is not alone. On BBC Breakfast this morning, we heard from Sam Robinson, the mother of Billy, who was in the passenger seat of a packed, overcrowded car with 7 of his teenage friends when it crashed on the way to a birthday party. Billy, as well as the driver, tragically